Ata haresa ladas ki Hashem hu Elokim ein oid milvadai. You instructed us to know that Hashem is God, there's nothing besides Him. We just read this pasuk in today's Kriya. This fundamental pasuk, Ata haresa ladas ein oid milvadai, is one of the highlights of Kriyas HaTorah on Tisha B'Av. But amazingly, there's one other occasion. There's one other occasion when this pasuk is recited b'tzibur. When the whole Kehillah says the pasuk of Ata haresa ladas. Even before we say Vayehi ben Saya ha'arayin according to Nusach Ashkenaz, only once a year does the Kehillah say the pasuk Ata haresa ladas ki Hashem hu Elokim. Simchas Torah, Tisha B'Av, and Simchas Torah. How unusual for these 2 days to share this commonality. Rabbi Yosef of Kasani in his Sefer Or Mole teaches us that on Tisha B'Av and on Simchas Torah we highlight the pasuk Ata haresa ladas in order to demonstrate the profound connection between these 2 days, Tisha B'Av and Simchas Torah. While in the past we may have wondered about this connection between Simchas Torah and Tisha B'Av, this year we don't wonder about that connection. This year we experienced Tisha B'Av on Simchas Torah. In Kinnus Chav Daled, Rabbi Lezer HaKalir laments Al Churban Beis HaMikdash Ki Huras V'Chihudash, over the destruction of the temple that was trampled and torn down. Esboid B'chol Shana Misbeid Chadash, I will compose a new elegy annually, every single year. What does the Mekoinen mean that every year I will compose a new elegy? A new elegy? Nothing new happened. It's same old. We know the story. The story is static. The story doesn't change. It is what it is. Why compose a new elegy every single year? But the story is not static. The story changes. There's a new story. This year there's a new story. This year, when we read in Eicha in the final parak, Shavas Mesois Libeinu, that the joy of our heart ceased, Nepach Le'evel Mecholeinu, that our dancing turned to mourning. This year, when we read that our dancing turned to mourning, these words carry a new meaning. Literally, the dancing of Klal Yisrael on Simchas Torah was transformed into mourning. This year in Eretz Yisrael, the dancing, the hakafos, were literally interrupted by people who heard the news running into shuls, from shul to shul, from neighborhood to neighborhood, telling everyone Hamas had broken through the border. They broke through the fences, they were racing through the south, murdering Jews. This was in middle of the hakafos. People in middle of hakafos ran to the Amud to say Tehillim in sobbing tears. No shul could even continue hakafos after that, and if they did, it was a pale version of the one they started. This year when we said the words Alayla ani boichia Eini Eini Yarda Mayim Hayu Banai Shememim, my children were laid desolate, it wasn't only referring to children in the times of the Churban. It wasn't only referring to children in the times of the Holocaust, but it was referring to children in our times. Children murdered in the most inhumane, barbaric ways. According to reports, they were put in ovens, and when we reported it, the nations of the world mocked our reports. This year when we said in Eicha, Yisoymim hayinu ve'ein av, that were orphans without a father. Who cannot think about what happened in Kfar Aza? A massacre of historic proportions. 60% of the Moshav was annihilated, was brutally murdered, with atrocities that murdered some of the worst tragedies of the Holocaust. In one home, the parents were hiding in a safe room. They had just with twin baby boys. They're locked up for hours and hours. The babies start crying. There's no food. They don't have food in the safe room. Thinking the coast was clear, the mother left the safe room. She had no choice. As soon as she exited the room, the terrorists found her. She was tortured in the most despicable ways. Then she was murdered, as was her husband who came to rescue her. When United Hatzalah volunteers were waiting outside of Kfar Aza, they were stunned when they saw two soldiers coming running with two twin baby boys. The soldiers didn't even know what to do with them. They weren't equipped to hold on to them. The Hatzalah volunteers couldn't believe babies, they're alive, crying for 14 hours. No one answered their cry. But at first they didn't realize that these children were Yisoimim Hayinu Ve'ein Av. Their parents were no longer alive. How could these babies survive 14 hours? They were literally in the hands of terrorists. But when the terrorists heard the babies crying, they were hoping they would hold on to the babies, get them to cry more. Then the people would try to rescue them, and they would kill all who attempted to rescue these children. So the residents of Kfar Aza realized that they have to deafen their ears to the cries of these babies. They had to restrain themselves from going to the babies, but who could withstand the heart-rending cries of these children? Eventually the soldiers come, they fight off the terrorists. In the middle of the battle, two soldiers grab the babies. They run out with the babies with gunfire overhead. They bring the babies to United Hatzalah volunteers. What's Hatzalah going to do with these children? They have to find the parents. The parents were not alive. So they give the two babies to the grandmother who had lost her son and daughter-in-law and now has to care for two baby boy grandchildren, babies who are too young to even understand that they are Yisoimim Hayinu Ve'ein Av. When we read Imoiseinu Ka'almanois, could you not think of the young wife of Yosef Gedalia, who was married for 1 year, and he went to fight in Gaza, and he never returned, leaving his wife Sinai in Almana at 23 years old. This wasn't 2,000 years ago. This was this year. When we read in Eicha, Nashim b'tzion inu, women in Sion were abused. On Zaman Simchaseinu, the pinnacle of our happiness, on Shmini Atzeres, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Klal Yisrael, please spend just one more day with me. On that day, Benois Yisrael were abducted and violated. The whole world has changed since October 7th. We live in a different world. You know, we used to hear post 9/11. Now we live in post October 7th. People remember where they were standing in November 1963 when Kennedy was assassinated. I'm having a hard time remembering that particular event. We all remember where we were standing when the Twin Towers came crashing down. We will remember forever where we were when we heard about October 7th. So maybe it's the same script, but there's a new story. Some of the details we have never seen before. On Shabbos Chazoin we read the haunting words. Uvifarischahem kapechem Alim einai mikem. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, when you spread out your hands in prayer, I will ignore you. Gam kisarbu tefila eineni shoymea. I am not listening anymore to your prayers. For the first time in the history of the Jewish people, Mekayimos HaTfilah were closed. They weren't closed during COVID, but now after October 7th, they're closed. For the first time, Meron was closed on Lag BaOmer. For the first time, the kever of the Arizal was closed on his yard side a few days ago. Never have we seen in our history Mekoymos HaTfilah were closed. That's what we read in Eicha. Sakoisa be'anan lach me'avar tefillah. There's great sensitivity, especially among B'nai Torah, B'nai Yeshiva, from adding anything to the liturgy of our tefillahs. We recognize the greatness, the holiness of the composers of all the traditional tefillahs and piyutim. We deem ourselves unworthy to join their ranks by adding our own compositions. Nevertheless, when it comes to Kinnus, there is some precedent to be able, not as a kehillah, but as an individual, for one's own private recitation, to add a kina to express personal tsar. The Sefer Seder Hayom was written by Rabbi Moshe ben Machir, a Talmud of the Arizal. He writes, by the way, he's the author of Moida Ani Lefanecha, Melachai V'Kayam. He writes, U mitzvah hi al kol adam, lechaber kinim, v'hege v'hi. It is a mitzvah for every individual to compose a personal kina. V'loymar oisam b'yoyim hamar hazeh, u'tzedaka yechashev lai, v'nikra me'avele Yerushalayim umikdoisheha, u'misha einoi bar hachi. But if you're not capable of it, yasik b'mashe chibra acherim, then engage in what others have already composed. So I would like to read to you from a kina that was composed to mourn the massacre of October 7th. Not that we have the authority to add this annually to our liturgy, or that we could officially include it even this year, but to bring out a little bit what the Mekainen expresses, Espoid b'chol shana mispeid chadash, that we will mourn every year a new morning. Alela ani boichia v'libi noihem nehima, michutz tishakel cherev, from the sword that looms outside, bebe'eri v'reim kvaraza usederois chalilai mutalim arumim v'arumais. Our corpses laid astrewn, nivlasam kesucha l'chayas haaretz. What about this stanza? Sinas oilam la'am oilam hoileches u'miskaberes. The eternal hatred for the eternal nation grows and magnifies. Amrim l'chu v'nachidei migoy v'lo yizacher shem Yisrael oid. The nations of the world say, come, let us plot and destroy the Jewish people. For this we all mourn together with the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. But let's come back to the unusual combination and connection between these two opposite days. Hachag asher nepach liyogoin v'tzara, yoim matan das savarti l'choygaga. On the day that we hoped, we anticipated to celebrate the giving of the Torah, Simchas Torah was transformed to mourning and sorrow. And since then, uve'mekoyma ad hayoim, seirad einai dima ve'elila ve'anuda. Tisha B'Av and Simchas Torah. You know, I just came back from a Jewish heritage tour of Greece, and I was in the city of Athens, and I was reminded of the Gemara in Bechoros and Daf Chesam at Beis. The Gemara in Bechoros teaches us about a conversation between the Chachmei Atuna and Rabbi Shua ben Chananya, where the Chachmei Atuna present to Rabbi Shua ben Chananya two white eggs. And they say one of these eggs comes from a white chicken, one of these eggs comes from a black chicken. What exactly was this conversation between Rabbi Shua ben Chananya and the sages of Athens? Says the Marsha that in our calendar we have two 21-day periods of the year, represented by the eggs. The incubation period of an egg is 21 days. The first of these 21 days are the 21 days of Rachamim, beginning with Rosh Hashanah, culminating with Hoshana Rabbah. The second are 21 days of Avelos, of Peronios, beginning with Shiva Asar B'Tammuz, going until Tisha B'Av. 21 days when we are Mis'abel over Yerushalayim. And the Chachmei Atuna were asking, how could one God give one nation two 21-day periods that are so diametrically opposite, so diametrically opposed? Are they Rachamim? Is this God a God of Rachamim? Or is this God a God of Peronios? Ask the Chachmei Atuna. And the answer is, they are both days of Rachamim. They both the Yomim Noiroim and the Bein HaMetzorim, they bring Kapara and Slicha and Rachamim to Klal Yisrael. But the Rebbe of Bluzhev took this further. The Bluzhev Rebbe, in the Sefer Tzfilat Tzaddik, writes supernatural chidushim, comparing the 3 weeks of Rachamim to the 3 weeks of Peronios. Says the Bluzhev Rebbe, Kal Balahi Biyad Hatzadikim, Shehayomim Halalu Diyimei Hamitzorim Hema Kineged Hayomim Hakadoshim Diyimei Tishrei. That the days of the Bein HaMetzorim correspond to the 21 days of Tishrei, but not 21 days, says the Bluzhev Rebbe. 22 days. Take it all the way to Simchas Torah. Take it all the way to Tisha B'Av. Says the Bluzhev Rebbe, not only does each day of Rachamim correspond to each day of Din, but the Yemei HaRachamim are designated to sweeten and to soften and to bring Rachamim to the Yemei HaRatzain. Rav Moshe Wolfson, in a rare volume of Emunas Itecha, says not only does the Bluzhev Rebbe compare the 22 days to the 22 days, but the 9 days of Sukkot themselves, including Simchas Torah, correspond and sweeten the 9 days. With Simchas Torah being the designated day to sweeten the Peronios of Tisha B'Av. Simchas Torah was given to the Jewish people to sweeten, to temper the din of Tisha B'Av. So the Shvilei Pinchas writes, now we understand the deeper kavana. Why does the Rebbeinu Shalom give Simchas Torah to Klal Yisrael? It's not only that he says, I've been with you for 21 days, kasha alai predaschem. It's not only Hashem is saying, give me one more day. It's so difficult for me to depart from you. The Rebbeinu Shalom is telling Klal Yisrael, kasha alai predaschem on Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is so difficult for me. Tisha B'Av is so painful to me to take leave of you. Haisa ka'almana, I can't just give you a Tisha B'Av. Just stay with me one more day of Simchas Torah so I can temper and sweeten Tisha B'Av. Kasha alai predaschem of Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is called a Moyed. How in the world is it a Moyed? What's the Moyed? You're enjoying this? You like to sit on the floor? You like not to eat? What is the Moyed about Tisha B'Av? Says the Shvilei Pinchas, Simchas Torah and Shmini Atzeres, what are they called in the Torah? Don't you dare call it a Chag. You know in the shul, you can't call Shmini Atzeres a Chag. It's not a Chag. Chag means on the exterior perimeter of the circle. The Yomim Tovim are called Chag. Shmini Atzeres is the center of the circle. It's not a Chag. What is Shmini Atzeres? It's a Moyed. You know why Tisha B'Av is a Moyed? From the influence of its deep, profound connection to Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. That is why Tisha B'Av is a Moyed. You know, on Tisha B'Av night, what do we take out of Kaddish? We don't say Tiskabel, because on Tisha B'Av, there's an idea that our tefillos are rejected. Miyom shecharav beis hamikdash. Ninalu sharei tefila shenemar gam ki ezak v'ashavea sosam tefilasi sakoisa be'anon lach me'avar tefila. Our tefilas are sealed out. But says the Belzer Rebbe, the Rebbeinu Shalom says, Kasha alai predaschem. This is too difficult for me. So the Sar Shalom of Belz would say, I can't tell you what the dancing of Simchas Torah does, but one thing I'll tell you, all the tefillos of the whole year that didn't rise at the time of the Rikudim of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. Says the Belzer Rebbe, the Gemara in Chagiga says on Daf Yud Zayin, Shmini Atzeres is what? Regel b'fnei atzmai. Says the Gemara, for how many things? 6 things. Pazer Kosev. Pazer Kosev is a mnemonic. For the piyasim, for the lotteries in the Beis HaMikdash, for Shachiyanu, this man, for the Regel, for the Karban, for the Shiur, for the Bracha. Says the Belzer Rebbe, Pazer! All the tefillos that were scattered the whole year because the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed and they cannot penetrate the Shamayim. Kosev! Hashem is makshiv on Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. The heavens are open on Simchas Torah to open up for us from what we lost out on Tisha B'Av. You know how tightly connected Simchas Torah and Tisha B'Av are. What is Shmini Atzeres called? Yichud HaShalem. The yichud that Klal Yisrael has with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Hashem is miyached with Klal Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom says, give me one more day, forget the food, kedei she'ahanu mimcha, so I could enjoy your company, beyichud. Says the Shvilei Pinchas, in the name of the Imrei Noyam. So when the Goyim go into the Beis HaMikdash, they see the Kruvim in loving embrace. What are the Kruvim doing in loving embrace? They should have been back to back. This were ein oisin ritzon shel makom. The influence of Shemini Atzeres on Tisha B'Av is such that even the Kruvim are embraced b'yichud HaShalem. The Vilna Gaon says Shemini Atzeres is on the 8th day. Because Kinar Shal Mashiach has 8 strings. Shmini Atzeres is Keneged, the Gula Ha'asida. Lo and behold, therefore, who is born on Tisha B'Av? Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. How? Through the influence of Simchas Torah. These 2 days, Simchas Torah was a matana given to the Jewish people to sweeten Tisha B'Av. Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. Last night I saw in a new kuntras from Rav Moshe Wolfson, if you take the hidden letters of the word Tisha B'Av, you spell out Tisha B'Av b'miluai, and you take the hidden letters, they are gematria bayis hashlishi. Shmini Atzeres Simchas Torah is the counterpart, was a gift from heaven to the Jewish people to sweeten the avelos of Tisha B'Av. So what should we do in a year that the opposite happens? What should we do if it's nepach la'evel mechoylenu, where instead of Simchas Torah, instead of Shmini Atzeres, Tisha B'Av is influencing Simchas Torah? What should we do if we had Tisha B'Av this year on Simchas Torah? How great the Midas Hadin must have been if nepach la'evel mechoylenu. But there's no question the Rebbeinu Shalom did not abandon us, because we know at the times of the greatest Hester Panim, at those times, afilu b'hastara, we see the greatest Giloi Shechina. You know, on that fateful Simchas Torah morning, there were no police on the street, there were no soldiers on the street. The roads, the highways to Yerushalayim were open. Once they got to Kfar Aza and Sderot, there was nothing stopping them if they would have gone to Yerushalayim. Why didn't that happen? It was a nes nigla. Every hotel in Yerushalayim was packed with Americans. There was no security in one hotel. What if the terrorists would have continued? They didn't continue. There was a Nes Nigla. You know, Reb Baruch Rosenblum, one of the big Magidim today, he tells a story that one of the commanders walked into the headquarters the morning of Simchas Torah, and their faces were ashen, their faces were pale, because they had an image from a drone that 3 tanks near Gaza were blown up. Each tank holds 12 soldiers. That means they had the terrible job. They would have to contact 36 families of soldiers in one day. To lose 3 tanks in one day never happened. All of a sudden they get a call from one of the soldiers. You know, what world are you calling from? He's fine, he's alive. So we're currently watching the drone image of your tank and 2 others blown up. What happened? What happened was, we were driving the tanks. We realized there was a problem with one of the parts. We saw the terrorists coming. We had to make a quick decision. We jumped out of the tanks and we ran for cover. When the second tank saw we jumped, they thought there must be a security concern. So their tank was fine. They also jumped. And the third tank jumped. So we're all okay. These are miracles of Gilui Shechina. You know, we read in Kina Chavav of how in the times of the Churban, Rachel Imenu came out of her grave to help the Jewish people, to pray for the Jewish people. How many stories did we hear of soldiers who were about to enter booby-trapped buildings? Buildings that would have blown up, and all of a sudden an elderly woman comes out and said, no, don't go there, don't go there. And when did these stories happen? On the yard side of Rachel Imenu. So there was great Gilui Shechina, but at the same time, the tragedies are unspeakable. More than 1,200 Israelis were killed. More than 250 were taken captive. The brutality, the cruelty, the likes of which we have not seen since the time of the Holocaust. And these tragedies are certainly worthy of commemorating and mourning on Tisha B'Av. But here's the most challenging element of this subject. What in the world is the point of remembering tragedy? What do we get out of it? What's the point of remembering past suffering? Isn't it enough that we suffered? Now we have to sit on the floor and rehash the gory details. And now what's the point of wallowing in our misery and crying in our misery? You know, there's a famous account, it's recorded in the Ramah Sefer, Torah Ha'olah, that Yirmiyah Hanavi was crying on the Har HaBayis, and he met none other than the philosopher Plato, Apolloton. And Yirmiyah was weeping over the Churban Beis HaMikdash, and Plato asked Yirmiyah, you're a smart man. You're a grown adult. Why are you weeping over the past? Why are you crying over spilled milk? And that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. We're intelligent people. Aren't there better things we could be doing today than sitting on the floor, rehashing? It's enough we suffered once. We have to inflict more pain on ourselves? In fact, the Nesivos HaMishpad authored an epic commentary on Megillas Eicha. It's entitled Palgei Mayim. And in his introduction, he advances, there is no independent, inherent value in Judaism to cry, to weep, and to mourn. It has no value. It only has value if it's constructive. It only has value if we reach the level where we're nachbesa derachenu v'nachkoira v'nashuva el Hashem. It is only valuable if you investigate and you identify what caused the tragedy. What was the chait that elicited this response from the heavens? Otherwise, It's an empty way to spend your time. Mourning, crying, remembering only has value if it leads to what we say at the end of Eicha. Hashivenu Hashem Elecha V'nashuva. And thus the Nesivos explains that the purpose of his commentary on Eicha is not to explain the pain and the tragedy that we're mourning, but to identify what caused it. And just parenthetically, in the prism of this Nesivos, before mourning and commemorating the Holocaust on Tisha B'Av, the Nesivos would apparently maintain it only has value if you could identify what you could learn from the Holocaust. But just to sit on the floor and remember does not have value in Jewish thought. Regarding mourning for October 7th on Tisha B'Av, last night when we read in Eicha the following words, I had a deep tziter. Shachach Hashem b'tzion moyed v'shabos vayinatz b'zam apoy. Moyed, Yom Tif, and Shabbos were forgotten in Sion. It is not our place to indict anyone, but the facts are October 7th was both the Moyed and the Shabbos. And Hashem Yishmerenu, the holiness of the Moyed and the holiness of the Shabbos was forgotten. The Kedushas Moyed, the Kedushas Shabbos were forsaken. And when Shachach Hashem b'tzion Moyed v'Shabbos vayinatz b'zam apoy. You know, who are we to say? Who are we to give reasons? Who are we to say why? But friends, it's not always rocket science. Was it not a miracle when the terrorists were going from one moshav to the next? They could have attacked the yeshiva in Tifrach with 1,500 bachrim, but they were celebrating Simchas Torah. Not even one person there had a gun. No terrorists entered there. Over there it wasn't Shachach Moyed v'Shabbos. Could you ignore the accounts of the kibbutzim who were Shoimrei Shabbos, who miraculously were not attacked? Can you ignore the astonishing account of a family in a kibbutz who began to keep the Shabbos, and because they were in uncomfortable surroundings on Shabbos, they had no choice, but they would leave the kibbutz every Shabbos to go somewhere else. But the Shabbos of Simchas Torah, the mother is expecting. She doesn't have the kayak to go somewhere else. She tells her husband, okay, you know what? We're coming close to the due date. Let's just stay here this Shabbos. All of a sudden they wake up, Shabbos morning, Simchas Torah, they hear gunshots, people yelling, screaming in Arabic. Something terrible was going on, so they hide in their house. Hours and hours pass, the gun shooting stops. No one ever came to their house. It was as if the terrorists couldn't see their house. The IDF comes, a battle ensues. They find on the body of one of the terrorists, you all know the story, a map of all the homes of this moshav with information on every single family. And regarding this family, it says, don't go there. They're never home on Shabbos. Can we ignore such compelling stories? One cannot be blind to the fact that those who were not Shachach Shabbos Umoyed were given great protection. This is not, heaven forbid, this is not being judgmental or condemning anyone. I don't know anyone who was there. I don't know why they were there. Maybe they didn't know better. They were Tinok Shenishba. We should have taught them. This is not about them. This is about us. Have we made sure that in Klal Yisrael it's not Shachach Moyed v'Shabbos? If it happened on Simchas Torah, You say, what am I supposed to do? Do you daven for Klal Yisrael? When you say, Hashivenu avinu l'soirasecha, Ribbono Shel Olam, return your children to your Torah, who do you think about? Do you think about all of Klal Yisrael? When you say, V'karvenu malkeinu l'avodasecha, who do you have in mind? When you put on tefillin in the morning, when you wear a talis, when you keep Shabbos, the Mesilas Yesharim writes that the highest level of doing mitzvahs is l'toivas hadar. Not only for you, not only for your family, to do mitzvahs to elevate the entire generation. You know, there's a principle from the Baal Shem Tov that if you're walking down the street and you see someone doing an Aveira, or you're in shul, you see someone sinning. Of course, so you have responsibility to be Moichiach. There's no question. But the question is, why is the Ribbono Shel Olam showing you someone else's sin? Why did I have to see it? What did I need to be there for? Says Ribbono Shel Olam, I'm sending you a message. It's not about him, it's about you. This is you. If you see someone sin, the Ribbono Shel Olam is sending you a message. This is what you do wrong. This is your flaw. This is your shortcoming. The other guy, he has a problem. He needs to work on it. But why did you see it? You saw it because Hashem is telling you, you need to work on this. If we were shown Chilul Shabbos v'Chilul Yom Tif b'Farhesya, what does it say about our Shmiras Shabbos? What does it say about our Shmiras Yom Tif? What does it say about the way we conduct ourselves on Simchas Torah? Maybe there's a lot of learning today. Maybe there's a lot of Esek HaTorah. But have we forgotten what a treasure we have and how much we have to rejoice in it? So I was thinking about this connection between Simchas Torah and Tisha B'Av. So I wrote a message to the Shvilei Pinchas on Friday. I wrote, L'chvoid Rebbe Meir, in light of the compelling connection between Simchas Torah and Tisha B'Av, how do we view the terrible tragedy of October 7th taking place on Simchas Torah? How do we understand Klal Yisrael experiencing Tisha B'Av on Simchas Torah? So the Shvilei Pinchas wrote back as follows: Ein safek sheyesh kesher bein ma she'alfei me'achenu beis Yisrael b'makom l'smoyach im haTorah. There is no question that there is a connection, that if thousands of Jews, instead of rejoicing with the Torah, hamaginoi umatzli me'oivei Yisrael, that protects us from our enemies, hafchu es Simchas Torah l'Tisha B'Av, they transform Simchas Torah into Tisha B'Av, bechilul Shabbos hamoini, in public desecration of the Shabbos. Uve'ikvay zeh hitzlichu soinei Yisrael lahafoich es Simchas Torah l'Tisha B'Av. Efshar lahamletz. This is what the Ribbono Shel Olam tells the Jewish people on Simchas Torah. Kasha alai predaschem. Ani ma'oid sameach sha'atem oiskim b'Torah v'avodas Hashem. It's very nice. A handful of observant Jews are rejoicing with the Torah. But kasha alai predaschem, from the vast majority of Klal Yisrael, who don't even know what a Simchas Torah means, and because of that, there are Azav es HaTorah, Hashem Yishmerenu. That's another dimension of Kasha Alai Predaschem. That's another dimension of Hashem taking leave of us. But Anu Mekaveh, we therefore hope, Shebeschus Hisoirus Shel Tshuva V'nachlei Dam Shenishtabchu, in the merit of our inspiration to do tshuva and all the blood that's spilled, we should all merit lahapoich Tisha B'Av l'Simchas Torah. As we've said over many times, the haunting tune of Tisha B'Av has one more appearance during the course of the year. By now, I'm sure you've heard about it. There's one other time a year that we use the haunting tune of Eicha. Surprisingly, we use it on Simchas Torah. Ba'avur David Avdecha al tashev Kai hanecha yilbeshu tzedek. But there's one slight difference between the tune on Tisha B'Av and the tune on Simchas Torah. On Tisha B'Av, it ends on a sour note. Hayisak yamana sarasi b'amedina is chadesh yameinu kehekadem. But on Simchas Torah, there's a little turn in the key. Hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva chadesh yameinu kehekadem. Now we have a tradition that when Mashiach comes, Megillas Eicha will still be one of the 24 books. But what will the tune be? We'll borrow that little tune from Simchas Torah, and it will be Chadesh Yameinu Kekadem. And that's the day we're all hoping for. As it's been said many times, this year we experienced Tisha B'Av on Simchas Torah, in the zechus of being misabel over Yerushalayim and all the tragedies of Jewish history. But it has no value if we're misabel, if it doesn't come along with nachbesa, derachenu, v'nachkoira, v'nashuva el Hashem. But if we're able to do that, we should all be zoicha to sing b'nigun sameach, hashivenu Hashem elecha v'nashuva, chadesh yameinu kekadem.